preparing to defend against a second gigantic attack even as they're already under assault by Russia. Ukrainian units held large-scale drills to prepare for bigger battles to come, the head of Ukraine's Joint Forces Command tells me. We need to know what exactly to prepare the forces for and how they should be prepared, he says. That's why this is so important. We're in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, site of the worst nuclear disaster in history. Ukraine's special forces also practicing urban combat in the abandoned buildings. The U.S. and its allies believe the Russians could mount a massive offensive once the spring comes. That's why the Ukrainians are getting their forces ready, even as they're already fighting the Russians on several fronts in this country. The Ukrainians say that to win, they need more modern Western weapons, especially main battle tanks. In terms of quality, of course, there's a big difference, the general says, because the fire control systems of Western equipment are far superior to Russian weapons. As the battles in places like Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine remain brutal and casualties mount, Ukraine's leadership says it's grateful for the massive military aid announced at the Ramstein meeting. But Kyiv is disappointed Germany still hasn't signed off on sending Leopard 2 main battle tanks, which would be key to help them turn the tide, a top presidential advisor tells me. Our guys won't leave the battlefield even if they aren't provided with new equipment, he says, but more of them will die. This must stop. We want our people to have a better chance of saving their own lives. The Ukrainians say the new aid announced Friday will go a long way to help them beat Russia back, and Mikhailo Podolyak says he hopes the U.S. and its allies will keep weapons flowing in the long run. I think our allies have the perfect understanding of the price we're paying, he says, that it's very important for Russia to lose. They understand the nature of this war, the nature of Russia, and why it is impossible to negotiate with them. The Ukrainians say they need to grasp the initiative before the Russians can recover from their losses, and they're gearing up for what could be a brutal spring. But Jake, the Ukrainians also say there is a whole nother facet to this as well. They say they're having increasing problems getting spare parts for their Soviet-era tanks and ammunition as well. So on the one hand, those modern Western tanks would be for better capabilities, but it's also about staying in the fight, especially as that Russian offensive looms. Jake?
All right, Fred Pleitgen in Kyiv, Ukraine. Thanks so much. Let's talk about this with William Cohen, former Republican senator from Maine and defense secretary in the Clinton administration. Secretary Cohen, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with the tank standoff. Germany's defense minister says there are both good and bad reasons for giving Ukraine the Leopard 2 tanks that they're desperately asking for. Why do you think Germany is so hesitant here?
Well, I think part of it is political and certainly emotional on the part of the Germans. And we don't give Germany enough credit for what they've been doing and the amount they're contributing, both in material and equipment and now money. So I think with anyone who's trying to divide Germany and separate them out as being not a good ally, they're wrong. Germany is a great ally. The problem is they've got a history. And they have another issue, not only their history, but I don't think they want to be seen as being the country that's triggering any kind of escalation. And if there's going to be an escalation, they want all of us to be involved in that. And so I don't think it's unreasonable for them to say, we'll put our best main battle tank there, but we want you to have yours there as well. Even though the capabilities are quite different, even though it doesn't necessarily translate into more effectiveness, symbolically, it's really important. I hope that they're able to work this out. Secretary of Defense Austin has said we're still working it, and I hope that they do it quickly because time is of the essence. But I would say whatever it takes to get the Leopards there, if it takes some Abrams to go, I would say do it.
So if you were Secretary of Defense right now, you would say send 2 or 3 Abrams tanks over there if that's what the Germans need as cover, even if they really need a lot. It sounds like the Ukrainians are saying we need dozens, if not hundreds, of the Leopard 2, which are more agile than the Abrams.
They're more agile. They're more modern. They use a fuel which is easily obtained. You need the fuel from the Abrams. It's basically jet fuel they have to have. You have a whole supply chain problem with the Abrams. But I would say under the circumstances, if what they need are tanks, and we can help get the Germans to say it's okay if you're in it, we're in it. I think the most important thing is saving Ukraine from Russian extermination as such. What the Russians are doing, they are engaged not only in what they call denazification, depopulation of Ukraine. They are annihilating the people of Ukraine. So anything we can do to prevent more of that slaughter from taking place, we ought to do it. And if it's a question if we're providing something that's not that combat effective under the circumstances, let's do it anyway so we can get the Germans to satisfy their local political problems, which are real, and we ought to address them.
If Ukraine does not get these tanks and the other heavy weaponry that they're requesting, like long-range missiles, how do you see their fight against the Russians going forward in the next few months, especially if there's a spring offensive?
Well, it's a war of attrition at this particular point, and what the Russians are doing are trying to just destroy the will, obviously, but the means of survival in terms of heat, electricity, water, food, energy, etc. So what they're trying to do is wear down the Ukrainians. And if it's a war of attrition, then we have to give whatever the Ukrainians need to take the battle against the Russians and to defeat them on the ground. And the notion that the Russians are saying, well, if we lose on the ground on a conventional basis, we may use nuclear weapons. Well, they've said that before, and that's something we have to be concerned about. But you can't have Russia wrap itself in a nuclear jacket and threaten to blow itself up in the rest of the world. That's simply not going to happen, in my opinion. But we can't have the world standing by, terrified that they're putting on this vest and saying we're going to blow not only Ukraine up, but much of the world.
Well, that's just it. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs issued the warning about the increased supply of weapons to the West, saying, quote, "We regard all this as an open, provocative incitement by the West and an increase in the stakes in the conflict, which will inevitably lead to an increase in casualties and a dangerous escalation." Do you think there's an actual red line here for Russia? Because they've been saying that sort of thing from the very beginning, and every time the U.S. or the West gets incrementally involved, every time they say, well, that's the line, that's the line. But do you think there's an actual line?
There may be, and we can't not take that into account. But if we're going to allow the Russians to say, if we don't win, the world loses, and that's what they're saying to us and to the rest of Western democracies and much of the world. There are 54 countries in Ramstein right now. That's more than NATO. That's a lot more than NATO. The world is now looking at this in terms of the Russians have engaged in an act, a war crime by invading a neutral country. And now they're saying if we don't take possession of our, quote, little beauty, then we're going to blow the world up. We can't accept that, and we have to tell the Russians there'll be a terrible penalty that you will pay the day you ever think about using a nuclear weapon in this battle or any other. But we can't afford to have an extortion being waged against the United States, saying either you let us win, allow all of these Ukrainians to be slaughtered day after day, or else we might pull our nuclear button out and destroy much of Europe and much of whether India, China, all of the Middle East. There's no end to it once you start down the nuclear path. So I think we have to tell them, get out of Ukraine. You violated the law. You are causing world economic problems, and you're putting us on a path of open conflict with the rest of the world. Now's the time to settle this, and that would be get out of Ukraine. And I think we have to give the Ukrainians what they need to defeat the Russians on the ground and do it as quickly as we can. Because the longer this goes on, the longer there's a war of attrition, Ukrainians end up on the losing side of that.